Hi everybody. So this is a video I probably should have made a million years ago, which is how to learn standards. Okay, so I just want to do a little bit of background. I have behind me The Sacred Term of Jazz, which is of course the real book. Now this thing is the 5th edition real book. And if your 5th edition real book doesn't look like this, having lost half of the tunes at least, then you probably haven't lived it, man. But the thing is that this book is representative of a number of things. It's in my capacity as a sort of boffin, I would say it's an interesting historical text. And I think what it represents is the codification of the jazz canon. So this book came out in the 1970s. It was famously based on transcriptions by a few Berkeley students. I've got a good idea of who they might have been. And it was illegal. So you used to have to go into the shop and sort of ask in a hushed tone, have you got any real books? And then they'd take you way around the back, swear you to secrecy, and then they'd sort of reach out and they'd produce this tome, and then they'd give it to you, and then you'd have to put it in an unmarked brown paper bag, and then you would only be able to get it out in safe spaces like jazz jam sessions. But sort of watch out for the copyright police who are around every corner. Maybe not that. But the whole thing was very unofficial, right? Very dodgy, as we might say, in the UK. And then the new real books, which are really great books actually, by the Share Publishing Company came out. And they were all properly licensed and much more accurate, but they didn't have the same tunes in. Repertoire in here is really interesting, which is why I still love looking at the real book. It's things like, okay, so Epistrophe and Equinox, but then you've got like the original Pat Metheny jazz charts that would become, like Bright Size Life. And they don't even have titles yet because this was, he showed them to his students first and then they wrote them down and put them in the real book. I wonder how he felt about that. But anyway, interesting. Fables of Phoebus by Charles Mingus. I mean, how many times have you heard that one called at a jam session? But then things, by, I think, Berkeley faculty, stuff by Steve Swallow, for instance. So it's a really interesting and eclectic combination of tunes. And I think that gives people the idea that this is, I certainly did when I was coming up, that this is just like the jazz canon and there's no further context. But in fact, of course, there's many different kinds of jazz standards. And a lot of the tunes in the real book they're not actually standards. They're rarely played. So a lot of the tunes in this book are what we call Great American Songbook tunes. Things by composers like Jerome Kern, Rodgers and Hart, Cole Porter, so on and so forth, Gershwin, those sorts of people. And not really jazz tunes per se. They're kind of, a lot of them are show tunes. Some of them are just popular tunes that were on radio at the time. And, some of them are, from films like Stella by Starlight and Green Dolphin Street, right? These are real standards, if you like, the sort of standards that a singer would sing, as opposed to, Isotope by Joe Henderson, which is a jazz standard, but it's not like a song which a singer would sing unless they were, on a jazz course and made to do it or something, These are, songs, and they have lyrics. And they're actually designed to be memorable, which can help us. So anyway, Ethan Iverson did a list of about 100 jazz standards, which I'll link to, which are, popular songs of the early to mid 20th century, the sort of ones that are most useful for jazz musicians, at least, where he is in New York. I wanted to talk about how one might go about learning one of these old pop songs, one of these old show tunes, which is basically what they are. So I think that when I learnt it, I kind of looked at the music and I learnt the tune from the music, and then I had this sort of nice sort of guitar position thing going on. That's fine, nothing wrong with that. But actually how I would go about learning a song like this is to start by putting this thing down. Try and do it without pranging it. There we go, lovely. And just learning it as a song. And you can sing it wordlessly, hum it wordlessly. I mean, the pitch is not important, just sing along and learn it until it sticks in your head. Now, what helps is that there are indeed lyrics to this song. Excuse the singing. My heart is sad and lonely, for you I sigh, dear, for you, dear, only. Why haven't you seen it? I'm all for you, body and soul. Okay, I'm not sure if that's very good, but it's a rough go at it. Now, The lyrics are kind of important because they teach us something about the way that the melody should be phrased. For instance, to give you an example, when I used to play Out of Nowhere, I used to play it, I learned it from a chart, and I used to play it somewhat like this. So, this is the melody. Later on, I actually heard a vocal version of it finally, and I realised that the words are, "You came to me from out of nowhere." And I was like, oh, because the phrase is not, "You came to me from out of nowhere." It's, "You came to me from out of nowhere." Oh, it's a jazz police again. Actually, this phrase has to go all the way through. It has to be connected. So I can't play. People differ, I think Herbie Hancock is on record as saying he's not really that interested in the lyrics of songs, and far from me to criticise Herbie Hancock, one of the greatest jazz musicians of all time. But, a lot of teachers, for instance, Barry Harris, cared a lot about the words, and I think the words do teach you something. And also the words help me remember the song. I mean, it's quite hard sometimes to sing a melody just without words, at least I find that. Obviously, as you can hear that, I'm flat on the note or whatever, but it doesn't matter because I have an idea of what it is in my head and the words help me anchor to that. So when I play it on the guitar, I have some concept of how the phrases are meant to work. One thing that you will learn right away from learning melody by ear is the form of the song. So for instance, if you look at Body and Soul, you'll notice that there's a bit of the melody that repeats, and then there's a different melody, and then the same melody comes back. And this is, of course, an AABA form. So the B is often called the middle eight, the contrasting material. So we get happens again. That's all right. And then we get and then back into the A section, right? So that's an AABA song. Not all tunes in jazz are AABAs, but quite a lot of them are, and that's one of the reasons why we teach that alongside the 251 in like sort of jazz 101, basically. You also get ABAC tunes, or sort of, a tune of two halves, as I call it. So things like Embraceable You, There Will Never Be Another You, Out of Nowhere is another example. These are tunes that aren't AABA, but ABAC. So you get a tune, one ending, same thing again, different ending. And then there's 12-bar blues. And I think between those three forms, you've got most of the basic ones covered. So then you will want to put it on the guitar. And, I mean, if I start in D flat, which is the key in the real book. Yeah, so this is important, I think, playing it along the string, because it allows you to make a connection between the ear and the notes, and you're not, because I think the guitar is kind of complicated when you're going over the strings like this. It's a lot to think about, you've got to think, what fingers am I using, what string am I putting this on? And actually doing that, it's just obviously quite difficult for this bit, And that's all the way down here. So, that big leap obviously works better. You're not going to want to do it like that on the guitar when you finally learn the melody. You want to play it across the strings. Whereas this bit will go along the strings much more naturally, and you can put little ornaments and things in there. You don't necessarily want to do that much, but it sounds like more vocal somehow. So I think, rather than sort of thinking about everything in position, you can start to think about how you might want to musically finger things. And with melody, this is kind of very important. Also, it's good to do different keys. Let's try it again. This might be a good key for a female singer, for instance. some G major as opposed to D flat, so tritone away, But then, try all different keys, try all different positions, get to know that melody well. And then once you've done that, you can start to put it on the guitar in a more logical way, which is not to say necessarily putting it in position, but thinking about how you can finger this musically. And sometimes intuitively it'll work really nicely. And one thing I do want to mention is that the melody of the A section of Body and Soul is actually almost entirely diatonic to D flat major, apart from one note. So all of these notes. And the one note that isn't diatonic, if you look, is that note there. And that, of course, is the blue note. It's a flat 3, which you often find in music from that period. It puts a bit of blues into it, right? Then the B section modulates. So we go into a key a half step up, D in this case, and a key a half step down, C. And you can hear that all and then see it when you lay it out on the guitar and you know your scales. You can see that in the melody. So from that point of view, the song doesn't really modulate until we hit the B section. And this is quite common for AABA tunes, yeah? So my preferred way to analyse the chords of a song is to compare different versions of the same song. And I think this is something that teaches you almost more about harmony than any other single thing, actually. Now, just a quick word about working on the changes of songs. Obviously, it's best if you can transcribe by ear from the record. I understand this is a bit intimidating for a lot of people at the start. If you work with an earlier version, you can listen to what the bass is playing, because quite often what the bass is playing is almost like a second melody. They're often playing in 2 rather than walking in 4, so it's easier, fewer notes to hear. And they outline the changes really clearly. And this is the case with Coleman Hawkins' version of the song, for instance. And this is the version that I've based one of the charts that we're going to look at today. And then from comparing these two, we're going to draw up a sort of generic, simplified version of blowing changes that we might use to improvise on it. Okay? So this is how I analyse. I think it works pretty well. I think it's interesting to compare different versions of the tune. As I say, some people go back to the original songbook and they work out what chords are being played in the piano part and go from there. And often they can make interesting discoveries that way. But for today, I'm just going to simply look at the jazz versions, should I say. Firstly being Coleman Hawkins' original version, and secondly being the version from the real book. So hopefully what you can appreciate right away is that the real book version has more chords. And this embellishing motion, understanding how it works, can actually help you be able to embellish other songs, right? 1930s style of playing changes are generally simpler than later. During the bebop era, we tend to get a lot of 2/5s, for instance. And you can see that, for instance, in the first 2 bars, we have that extra B flat 7, which is kind of just a way of dressing up that E flat minor, really. Then we go to an A flat 7 at the last moment to D flat. And then we kind of go up the scale. So in the real book version, we've got this G flat 7. Actually, in the original real book, we've got a D7. It's a tritone sub. So it's even more complicated than that. And then, we're going up to F minor, E diminished. And the E diminished is our first chromatic chord. So in the Coleman Hawkins version, we just go up a scale. D flat 6, E flat minor 6, D flat over F. It's almost like a rule of the octave, if anybody knows what that is. But it's just diatonic chords up the scale. Nothing to really, just a way of embellishing D flat major. And then we get to the E flat diminished with that lovely colourful sound, very typical of 1930s standards. Flat 3 diminished in this case. Moving down a half step to the E flat minor. And then in the real book changes, we have that D flat coming in. And then instead of moving to C half diminished, we're moving to A flat 7, A diminished, B flat minor. That's exactly the same thing as the C half diminished F7 there. And actually, if we were using the Barry Harris method for playing a minor 2-5-1, that is actually what we would play over the top. So it's quite good to have that in the chart, actually. In any case, all we're doing is just going to B flat minor. And then it's A flat, in this case A flat augmented, but it's acting as an A flat 7, back to D flat. And then we've got some movement back to the E flat just before the repeat, which in the original Coleman Hawkins recording I hear as a D diminished, but in the real book changes it's kind of a more complicated turnaround. It goes G flat 7, F half diminished, B flat 7, but that's just doing the same job. The B flat 7 is setting up the E flat minor. So what I think might be useful is to take I combine these two charts and then simplify them right down so we've just got dominants, right? And the way I would do it is this. So we start with the E flat minor for a bar there and a half, and then A flat 7, D flat. Leave that. Don't add in any other chords until we get to the E diminished 7th, and then E flat minor for a bar. And then I'm just going to say F7 for a bar. Put flat 9 in if you want, I don't care. B flat minor, then that's half a bar, and then A flat 7, half a bar, D flat major, and then B flat 7 back to E flat. Now this is similar to the Hawkins charts, the Coleman-Hawkins version, but what I've changed, I've just sort of swapped out some of those funny diminished chords and things which might be less familiar for simple 5/1 motion. This is, to be fair, a boring way to play the changes, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend you comp this way. Either version, the real book version or the Coleman-Hawkins version is nice, depending on what kind of a band you're playing in. I'm not going to cover the B section today, so this video is already long enough, but you can make similar comparisons based on the B section. And I will pop up the changes at the end so you can compare them in detail. Obviously, one thing that you will want to do is memorize the chords. And my advice for doing this is just simply try to do this with a lot of tunes. You'll start to notice patterns. 2-5-1 is obviously a very well-known example. And the more tunes you'll learn, the more you'll see how songs tend to go to closely related keys. For instance, the subdominant, the 4, dominant 5, relative minor, the 2, things like this. And I really don't think there's a better way of learning than just like learning a load of standards. There's a couple of books, Here in the Changes by Jerry Coker, which is easier to get hold of than the other book, which is The New Guide to Harmony with Lego Bricks by Conrad Cork. Sadly passed away last year. Both books are really good, but I don't necessarily think there's a better way of doing it than simply trying to learn lots of tunes. And the more you learn, the easier it will get. Again, Ethan Iverson's list can be helpful in this. Anyway, as always, please put any questions or queries you have below. It's always good for me to know what kind of thing people want to know that I might not have covered in the video. Like and subscribe, all that sort of stuff. As I say, I hope you find it useful, and thanks for watching. See you in the next one.